Americans for Prosperity is part of a larger community called Stand Together. So I invite you to go to standtogether.org to see that we work on a lot of things across a large spectrum. We believe that there are 4 key institutions to society. There are probably more, but those are the 4 in which we most often engage. So community is one, business is another, education, and government. So within our Stand Together community, you will find that we are often engaging in different pieces and different parts of those key institutions. Now, what do I mean by an institution? If I say to you, we're engaging in the institution of government, which is where Americans for Prosperity does the majority, 99% of its work, is like I said, we're trying to pass transformative policy at all levels of government. And then we even sometimes work in local government, right? Sometimes we talked about taxes earlier, right? I've had some tax fights at the local level. Well, what is an institution? Or what is it not? If I say I work in the key institution of government, what does that mean to you when we think about society as a whole?
A component.
Pardon?
A component.
Okay, so you're kind of heading in the right direction. So if I walk out this door and go up the street, I'm going to see a big building with a dome on top, right? That's our state capitol. That's a brick and mortar building where a lot of the pieces of government transpire within that building. But the key institution of government is not just limited to a brick and mortar building, nor is community or business or education, right? Education is not just about the school you attend. It's not about the classroom that you walk into. When you're on your college campus, right, and you think about the key institution of education, it's made up of a lot of components, as you talked about. And so that includes the individuals and people that are impacted by that institution in society. So how does government, and I'm gonna have you go around the table, and I'm gonna ask you a question, and then I'm gonna take this back to why I'm asking this. Right now, there's a list of ways that the government impacts your life. Okay, the government has an impact on you, your daily life, the things that you do. What's at the top of your list right now? What is impacting you the most when it comes to government? Want to start here? She's looking. It could be a very long list. I mean, the government.
So how the government impacts my life?
Yeah. So look, it impacts your life in many, many ways. But what's at the top for you right now?
Probably the FAFSA.
Pardon?
FAFSA. So money from the government for school.
Okay.
I would say education policy.
Okay.
Freedom of religion.
Okay.
FAFSA as well.
Okay.
How fast I can drive.
How fast I can drive. Did you get a ticket or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Freedom of religion.
Pardon?
Freedom of religion.
Freedom of religion. Okay.
You sure do take a lot of my money. That's probably
So the economy or inflation, perhaps one of those two areas. Okay.
The legal implications and things that and hula hoops and circles I must jump through to start a business and to build a successful
All right, so regulation, right, or
Yes.
over-regulation.
I would say I only feel a very small part of what I will feel the effects of in 5 to 10 years, but even with a part-time job or the gas in my car, it still goes back to inflation and taxes.
Okay. The vast majority of people right now, and for some time, have been telling us when we ask this question, and we do this every week, we ask this question around the country. In all 50 states, we're doing some sort of work. The vast majority of the people are telling us that inflation and the economy are at the top of the list because we're all being impacted by higher prices, by things that we see. Now, inflation is caused by a lot of different reasons. One of the things that we can't do is spend our way out of inflation or print more money to solve it, right? Because those are issues that actually create inflation. So at the federal level, we're working a lot on economic policy. You will see us use a hashtag. I'm sure all of you are on social media of some sort, right? Perhaps, maybe. And if you're not, that's okay. We were just discussing that my grandson is like the least almost 22-year-old on social media. But there's a hashtag called Bidenomics. And if you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook. Twitter primarily the better place to look for hashtags. I suggest you follow along with that. You can follow us if you want to on social media at Americans for Prosperity space Mississippi on Facebook, and then AFP at AFP_MS. It's on the card that you have as well. _ on Twitter, and we put a lot of what I think are educational and insightful articles about things that are happening in Mississippi, about the policy that we're working on. You're going to see more of that as we get closer to session, because we're going to be rolling out some things that Douglas and I both are going to be working on, piece of policies, and I'll get to those in just a minute. But one of the things that I would say to you is this: if most of the people have inflation or some sort of aspect of the economy at their top of their list, what would you say, at what level of government have we failed?
Well, I would say federal. Do the body now.
Okay, that's one level. What about the state level? How have we possibly failed in the state of Mississippi when it comes to sound economic policy?
We've overregulated pretty much everything. We have found every loophole. We've created every loophole that we can to try and prevent new industry, new opportunities for people to grow small businesses, to be profitable, and that's all that.
Right. So we talked earlier about taxation, regulation, right? These are things that are the antithesis of a free market, and they're the antithesis of us having a prosperous economy. So Douglas put a slide up, and we were at the bottom. I'm going to say something to you, because I told you I left for 35 years, right? We were at the bottom when I left. I came back and we're still at the bottom 35 years later. Now I say this to you because you're all probably somewhere getting close to 17 to 18 to your early 20s, right, in your age group. What happens if we're at the bottom in 35 more years and you're young adults with families? Is that something you want to aspire to or see for Mississippi?
I mean, we're already experiencing a major brain drain here, so I mean, we're just gonna keep going down.
And frankly, I was part of that. I mean, I'm very honest about it. I was part of the brain drain, because at the time that I left, there was so little opportunity for employment and jobs that I couldn't see a future here. And it was painful. Like the day I left, my father was like, it was painful. But I went somewhere else and aspired. But I came back because there's this little phrase that I adhere to. You can tell me where it comes from. To whom much is given, much is expected. Anybody know where that comes from? Huh? Spider-Man. Okay. Well, that's pretty close now. It's actually biblical. Okay? So I was given knowledge. I was given skills when I was in Florida. And I worked for them. I don't want to say given, but I was provided a path of opportunity to do that. And so coming back here, my thought process is I could take what I've learned, take what I've been given, and hopefully apply it to make a better Mississippi. So what are some of the things that, if you had to say, we're going to go around the table again, how government's impacting you, but what would you say are some of the most pressing problems? And let's just put it in a bucket, okay? So policy can be foreign policy, it can be healthcare, it can be education, it can be immigration and border security, right? It can be all these things. If we go around the table, what do you think right now in Mississippi, just name one thing you think really could use transformative policy and an overhaul, if you will? Because healthcare, okay.
Infrastructure.
Okay. Oh yeah. I was driving out on my road today, and I left on Rice Road, and I was coming down. I was like, they don't fix that soon. I'm afraid it's just like there's like this chasm that's starting to form.
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Okay.
Crime.
Pardon?
Crime.
Crime. Okay.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. There's nothing you think we need to change in Mississippi that we can look at from a policy perspective.
I guess the possible infrastructure.
Okay, infrastructure. All right. Yeah, I remember. I don't know how many of you, because you're away at college, but I'm gearing up again now. I used to be a guest host on a weekly radio show, and starting election day, November, we will have on 9 to 10 on WYAB. We will have an hour American Express Radio will have their own hour talk show, which you can listen to online or listen to later because it will be archived as a podcast. I hope you'll listen and we'll roll out some more about that. But I used to drive back from WYAB a lot of times to Jackson, and one day our deputy state director was in the car with me. And he's like, "What is that up there?" And I was like, "Oh, it's the mattress." He's like, "The mattress?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's been put over the pothole so we don't lose a tire." It's not really infrastructure, right? It's not the best use of our, it was no use of our tax dollars, I don't think. I think it was just a community coming together and saying, I have to solve a problem from a real bottom-up solution, right? So, okay, we'll start with you again.
Governor assistance, welfare.
Welfare, okay.
Education.
Education.
I don't know if this is policy that needs to be changed, but I think we need more, what would be the word? We need more incentives for industry. We need more factory. We need to find a way where more industry can come to Mississippi, and then I think multiple other policies would follow, or multiple other issues would become better if Mississippi
If we
can
have more-
find a way to have more industry.
More jobs, right? More jobs is what you're saying? Yeah, so, we're going to talk a little bit about what you said very quickly, because I'm going to give you what's probably an unpopular opinion. I do not believe, and nor does our organization, in something called corporate welfare. How many of you know the definition of corporate welfare? Okay.
Yeah, that's the 2008 financial crisis aftermath was called. Yeah.
The bailouts.
Right.
Bailouts.
Yeah, so we want more jobs here, but what kind of things have we talked about earlier today that would actually help create more jobs in Mississippi? So Douglas, you talked about a really big one. We only got to 4%, but if we eliminated an income tax, would more businesses maybe want to come here if we didn't have an income tax? I've only paid income tax twice in my life, both times it's in Mississippi. So immediately coming here, I took a cut in pay because more taxes coming out of my paycheck, right? We didn't have an income tax in Florida. Businesses want to come there. Now, almost every state is guilty of corporate welfare and subsidizing people to come here. There's a big difference in how people do that. People should want to come to the state for all the good reasons. And besides low taxes, what else do they need? If you're coming here, you're going to need people to work, right? So you need a skilled workforce. That ties back to education. If we have an uneducated, unskilled workforce, why does somebody want to come here? They'll be like, well, who am I going to hire? Right? Between the brain drain and all of these things. So getting people to come into our state, we often have to pay them to do that. That takes valuable tax dollars away from fixing that pothole and getting rid of that mattress as I drive to Jackson. Because we're having to spend tax dollars and give credits to businesses. Now, there's different ways it gets done. It's very unpopular. Everyone in the legislature here at the state will vote generally yes for some business to come in because we are so desperate for jobs. But what if we spent the time, and we have in some cases, right, passing transformative policy that would actually eliminate regulations, eliminate the type of things, the barriers to the opportunities of a business coming here. What if we did more things that took away those things, the overtaxation, the overregulation, and allow businesses to want to come here because Mississippi is a great place to live. Like, I love living here. Yeah. I do. And people are like, well, you're leaving Florida, you're leaving the beaches. I was just at the coast 2 weeks ago. The beaches are really great there too, right? So there's a lot of reasons for people to want to come here and to do business here if we can remove the terrible things that are preventing it, right? So we need to focus on those kind of things rather than just on these incentives of saying, hey, we'll stroke you a check of X amount of $1 million if you'll just come open up a factory here. Because what does that do in a free market? It picks a winner or a loser, right? You're picking winners and losers when you say, we're gonna give you a great break. Now, I had to explain this once to, I was in a public housing community in Boca Raton, Florida. And most of the people there were on some sort of assistance. The fact that they lived there was a form of assistance. And I had to explain to them what corporate welfare was. So I had a 7 and 8 year old come up to the front of the room and I said, you sell purple shoes, you sell red shoes. I happen to be very fond of purple shoes. So I'm gonna give you money to build your factory. I'm gonna give you money to do certain things. But you over here, I don't like your red shoes so much, so you're on your own. You've gotta take care of your own way. You gotta make your own way, and you gotta build your own business, and I'm not gonna help you. What am I doing there? I'm picking a winner with the purple shoes. So from that perspective, you'll find that that is not something, it doesn't get fought very much here, because I think there's become a sense of people thinking that that's okay to do those subsidies. But if we can remove barriers instead, and we can provide the things that why businesses want to come here, we could do a whole lot less of subsidizing people to come to our state and start building an economy that is going out. A friend of mine recently used an analogy when we talk about Mississippi, and we're going to get into healthcare here next. I was at an event, used the analogy that we're looking at right now of contributors versus non-contributors being about 52 to 48%. So think of our economy as a big wagon, and in that wagon, we have to pull it, right? People that work that have to pull the state and pull the economy along are on the outside pulling the wagon. That's 52%. What are the other 48% doing? They're riding in the wagon. And for various reasons, okay? And it's easy to say, well, you could get a job, you're lazy, you're this, you're whatever, we could say these things, but that's not always the issue, right? There are many, many issues why people have or lack opportunity. And sometimes there's so many barriers that can be put in place. You talked about crime, right?
Yes, sir.
There are a lot of people who commit really bad crimes, and they're in jail and probably should definitely be there, right? They've harmed, we talk about do no harm, right? They've harmed people in a bad way, and they should. But there's a lot of people who've made some mistakes and are good people. And those individuals, we have to think about how do we forgive them, and how do we build a better path to opportunity? Because here's what's going to happen. They're going to get out of jail. They're not going to stay there forever for some of these low-level drug crimes or things like that. So how are we educating students, right? How are we getting to a piece of that? So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not going to unpack all of it because we're going to move to healthcare. So a lot of you said healthcare is an issue in the state. I want to ask you a question. Do you think healthcare could be treated the same as any other industry in the free market?
Relatively, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I think it should. I don't know if it can, but I think it should.
Okay. So the question then becomes, if you say, well, hey, yeah, it's an industry, why don't we treat it like the rest of the free market, right? Why don't we have competition to drive costs down? Why don't we have different means of providing and accessing healthcare? Well, let me share with you one law that we're fighting to repeal here. How many of you know what a certificate of need law is? Monica's in the back like, I know. I asked this a question to a lot of groups of people, and no one knows. So right now we're looking at trying to repeal 19 pieces of what is called a certificate of need law. There are certain entities in healthcare in which you have to have a permission slip from the government, the state government, in order to open that facility, purchase that piece of medical equipment, or to expand an existing facility. You have to go through a process, sometimes often costing thousands of dollars to apply, and the government can come back and tell you no. How is that not a free market if the government can make that decision?
Because then you don't have what he talked about, I'm willing to give you this for this amount of trade and value. So then, as you said, you have winners and losers because they're just simply picking based on either statistical evidence or personal preference.
What if I told you that often the competition gets to have a say in whether it's yes or no? So if I'm a facility and I don't want any competition to drive costs down, and I get some say in that certificate of need, right? To say like, hey, no, we don't need this here, you know, if I'm asked and I have input. Does that seem too fair to you guys? Yeah, I haven't had many people say certificate of need laws are great. Yes,
Is this what people relate to as big pharma?
pardon?
Is this what people relate to as big pharma?
Not so
Or is that
much,
different?
not so much, because it really is about facilities. So, to give you sort of one example, we had a bill this session, we had 2 bills, and all we were trying to do was negate, certificate of need laws around substance abuse facilities and mental health facilities. I can certainly send you, some studies if you like. You can go to the Capitol and sit on any hearing for judiciary and the judiciary be in particular around mental health. We have some of the highest rates of addiction and mental health in the state. And those of you who are you're working in, are going to be working in healthcare, you're probably well aware of that, right? And sadly, we also have a shortage of beds, affordable beds or affordable care in that industry. Most law enforcement officers will tell us, and we've talked directly to many around the state, that roughly 70% of the people incarcerated in their jails, whether it be county, local police, whatever it might be in their county, are actually suffering from one of those 2 things, mental health or substance abuse. And so there's a big push, and we've made some progress in some pieces of this. But my question becomes is, why do we have an archaic law that says you can't open one of these facilities without that permission slip from the government when we have a shortage and need? It should be up to whether it's nonprofits or for-profits to be able to open up these facilities and service the public. And again, if you reach out to me, I'm happy to provide you with the website that you can see who got approved and who didn't get approved. We actually track that here in Mississippi. So the thing is, a lot of people will argue, well, if we remove, I've heard this argument, if we remove certificate of need laws, all the hospitals will close. Or, you know, somebody will come in and there'll be competition and that hospital will have to close, or people will lose their jobs. The truth of the matter is, in states where certificate of need has been removed, that hasn't been the case. And so what we're proposing this year is a full repeal of some 19 pieces of the certificate of need law. And Douglas, I know you and your team are going to be working on this as well. Our Deputy State Director, Kay Yates, if you'd like to learn more and really drill down on certificate of need laws, he's available to speak to groups. By groups, if you just got 5 friends who are interested in healthcare, we're happy to come and talk to you about it and educate you on that piece. We're already touring around the state and have been for some time, educating the constituents in the districts about why certificate of need laws need to be removed. They traditionally drive cost up, do not reduce costs, and there's sort of this protectionist attitude. And so part of the issue is that some people will say, well, in my community, if another person was to have an MRI machine come in, or you know, some of the medical equipment were to be there, then we couldn't make all the money at the one facility that has it. The thing is, healthcare isn't about, it is a for-profit industry, but there are ways to make money and to treat it as a free market and drive costs down. Part of the problem we have in this country today for people not having healthcare, and I don't mean a health insurance card. There's a difference in having an insurance card and having adequate, affordable, accessible healthcare. There's a big difference. I can have an insurance card, but what do I get for it, right? You can sign up for a lot of programs that don't give you very much. And the idea in Mississippi is, let's take the broken system of Medicaid. If anyone's ever dealt with it, it is a broken system, okay? And let's just add a lot of more able-bodied Americans to it, rather than solving the problem of what healthcare costs by doing not just one piece of policy like CON, but several other pieces. I want you to write down a website. It's called thepersonaloption.com. And in your spare time, which I know you don't have much of because you're in school, and it's football season, so that takes up a lot of your spare time. I understand, trust me, I do. But when you get a chance, I'd encourage you, those of you who have an interest in healthcare, or even if you don't, go there. You will find a lot of promising pieces of what we consider transformational policies. Certificate of need is one, and you can drill down a little bit there. If you'd like to learn more, we're happy to come to your campus. Like I said, as long as we have about 6 people, I will send Kate there to share his personal story on Certificate of Need and share with you all of the details and answer more questions for you about it, because we can't cover it all today, so, but we're happy to do that. But go to that website and you can see. Now, one of the things that we know coming up in 2025, we already have some tremendous healthcare bills coming out at the federal level. And I encourage you, because while we're not a state with a large amount of congressional members, we have 2 senators and 4 congressional members, but I encourage you to impart upon your congressional members when you're talking to them. We'll happily educate you further on that federal policy, because we do believe some of these things are going to be solved at the federal level. There's bills out around HSAs for everyone, because not everyone can qualify for a health savings account now. There's a lot of policy in the healthcare sphere. But if you'll go to thepersonaloption.com, you can start there. And you all have my card. Email me. I have a plethora of policy information that our policy team is more than happy to send you, and I will connect you, whether it's through interviews. We do a podcast. We have all kinds of data for you to look through and understand more about how we could solve the healthcare crisis. Yes.
Now those certificates of need, is that the same thing as, like, I remember that they opened a facility in Kosciuszko a long time ago, and it had to do with, because that area was like underprivileged, I would guess, is what you would say, like with no healthcare or anything.
Okay.
Is that fitting under?
Well,
the,
someone would have to.
another bill?
Yeah, depending on the type of facility, if it was subject to a certificate of need law, the state would have to decide if it could open.
Okay.
And the thing is, we talked, go ahead.
So you think in cases like that, it take longer, even though there is a need for that, it take longer due to the government regulations to have a.
Yeah, I mean, it can sometimes take, a very long time for
Yeah.
a certificate of need to be approved, right? Maybe in that case, if it was not, it was a facility that was just a clinic or something like that, and it was not, not subjected to a whole lot of stuff, and there was a big need, people might have said yes right away. But sometimes it can take a very long time. Yes.
Who is the official overseer of these certificate of needs? And
So it goes through an agency, and I believe, and this is where I'm not good with all our acronyms here yet. Is it the Mississippi Department of Health, or
I think it's
it's
under the Department of Health.
Yeah, I think it just goes through there. I have the link to where you can see the approvals or disapprovals. There's an online application you make. You pay some money.
But it'd be like when you open a pizza restaurant, having to get the permission of Papa John. I mean, it's that crazy. And so, literally, we've got a case we're fighting before the 5th federal court. Home health. There's a growth. Demographic change means there are more older people in Mississippi today than ever before. So the need for home health, and home health is really good because it keeps people out of hospital. It keeps older people fit in their home. You would have thought they would approve. They haven't approved a license in 30 years for a new operator. And so if you own one of those, it's like a license to print money. But the people who pay are people on moderate incomes.
right.
Moderate wealth who can't get someone to go and look after Granny. I mean, it's outrageous. It's not criminal, but it's certainly unconstitutional, we argue.
But and remember, these laws also apply to expanding businesses, right? So the thing is, you could have an existing business that wants to do more, but if they can't get a license, and the license is required in XYZ county, and they want to go there and open up, they still have to go through this process. So the thing is look, I do not believe, given where we are in America and our healthcare crisis, that if we were to remove all the certificate of needs, that there would be just this mad rush in rural Mississippi to open hospitals, right? They're failing. We understand that, and we're having to deal with it in ways that is a little bit difficult right now, because it's really falling. The burden's going to fall. And look, 35 years from now, I could still be around because my grandma lived a little older than that, but chances are it's you and your children and your families and the other individuals here in the state who are going to be carrying this burden. You're going to be outside that wagon. When I talk to other states and I mention that, you know, like something like 25% of the people on Medicaid in our state, they're like, what? Because it's phenomenal for other people to hear that. So we have to start thinking about healthcare differently. Douglas and I did an event with someone by the name of Dr. Lee Gross. You can look him up. He has several videos. He was on Paul Gallo's show with us in Super Talk when he was here. I think you have some videos out. He's a primary care physician. We actually have primary care physicians in Mississippi. But he took a business model, which he's expanding again, and he took a failing hospital, turned it around to a small failing hospital, one of the poorest hospitals in Florida, turned it around to an actual hospital where people want to go for health care. He has a credible business model, and I think about a model like that. What if doctors could open up facilities like that as primary care physicians, and what would that look like if we had more accessible health care? Sometimes what we need is preventative care, right? That's a piece of healthcare that's so important, is that when people aren't getting the care they need throughout their life because of the high prices. So there's everything from price transparencies, those type of things. So what are we gonna do about it? I think we can't see, this is the problem. Everybody's looking for the silver bullet to solve the healthcare crisis. It was not one thing that got us to this crisis, it was several things. Even the insurance industries, the drug industry, all of the different pieces that came together where overregulation, burdensome taxes, all of these types of things occurred, and skyrocketing prices. Like, I'm sorry, but I could take my own aspirin to the hospital and it would sure cost a lot less. But giving you that aspirin isn't just buying the aspirin. So I think the thing that we have to really think about is, what are all the different types of things we could do to transform healthcare? And right now, what you're gonna hear from a lot of people is the only thing that's gonna fix it is to put more people on Medicaid, and as taxpayers, you pay for that. Two fallacies, or at least one fallacy that I want you to remember about this. You're gonna hear this a lot. Well, there's all this federal money that will come to the state. Well, that's still your taxpayer dollars. However, one thing that doesn't happen with Medicaid expansion, in some ways the programs have been implemented. Arkansas can show you that. It's a prime example of how not to expand Medicaid, because it was getting so out of hand they actually had to go in and put caps on it. But the federal dollars do not pay for all pieces of Medicaid when you expand. The state will have to chip in, because in most all of these instances, the healthcare piece is covered, but not the administrative portions. And in some cases, that could be 10 to 15% of that cost. So if we said, it cost $1 million to do anything, and I told you 10 to 15% of that's going to have to come out of your state tax budget, there's something there when we say, oh, well, the federal government's gonna pay for it. Let me just say something to you. The federal government, just remember this, does not produce any income, okay? It is yours, mine, everybody's tax dollars, right? So it doesn't produce income, it doesn't make anything. So when everybody says, oh, we're gonna get federal dollars for that, it's still coming out of the pockets of every American. Not just Americans in Mississippi, right? Not just Mississippians, everybody's paying for it. So it is a complicated thing. Because I think at the end of the day, all of us, we want people to have affordable, accessible health care. I do. I want everyone to live and thrive. A lot of the work that I do is around that premise. So how do we get there? I think we've got to look at some really transformative policies. And that leads me to another thing. Some of you said education was important to you, right? Education policy. So I worked for roughly 8 years in Florida on expanding our scholarship programs, and eventually it was bittersweet to be here this year when they finally passed a universal education savings account. Education is a powerful thing. Most all of you in this room have probably had the opportunity, maybe you have a different story, because I don't know all your stories. But not every child out there has the opportunity to go, because we mandate in the public school system where people should attend school. What if that school's not the right fit for you? What if that school is a failing school and you're stuck going there because your zip code is right there? And that's where the state says you have to go to school, right? State-funded schools are public schools. Charter schools are funded by states as well, but there's some differences in how they operate. Private schools, micro schools, if you've not tapped into what's going on in this movement of education around the country, and education at the foundational level of K through 12 is important to you, I suggest you start looking not only at what's out there, entrepreneurial. You know, I hear teachers talking about wanting to make more money. Honestly, I have seen some incredible entrepreneurial pieces for teachers to open their own schools, right? Their own micro schools, and to make more money than they were making in the public schools. Some of them have, some of them became entrepreneurs, fought that hard path, got there, and now have waiting lists, right? They might have started with 10, 15 students, and they now have waiting lists. Their schools are growing because something happened during COVID. Parents suddenly had children at home and looking over their shoulder and having to be more engaged in the day-to-day education. They actually saw what their children were learning. They actually saw how they were not learning perhaps, or how things were going, and it sparked a movement across this country. And we are now looking at, right now Texas is in a special session, Governor Abbott there to hopefully pass and sign off on a universal ESA. I haven't checked anything today, so if anything happened, I'm not up to date because I've been with you guys. We have seen, we will probably see bills in Alabama, and I don't know about you, but when the governor in Alabama mentioned that they want to try to pass an ESA, I was like, you know what? I cannot stand that they beat us in football. Let's not let them beat us in our education system. Let's get this done, right? So we're looking at the session of hopefully having, we're looking at some different things, everything from open enrollment, which would allow, for students to enroll in different schools in different places. But an education savings account, universal, is the goal that we're looking for. Does this mean that every person's gonna leave their public school? Absolutely not. There's no data in any state that shows that. There's no data, and to be honest with you, there's a study that just was recently out. One of the things that people in rural areas say, well, if you have a education savings account, our schools are gonna close. People will go elsewhere and they're gonna whatever. That's not what the data is showing, and especially in states like Arizona, places like that who have rural areas, right? There's the desert's pretty rural. In fact, the opposite has occurred. Their schools are thriving, and sometimes people are going, if I had the choice and I was in a failing, crime-ridden, horrible school, and maybe my parents could drive 10 more miles this way across the county line to go to a very good public school, you might just go there, right? That might be the place for you to go. So, yes.
So I got a question about that.
Okay.
As a public school graduate who's a believer in school choice, product of public schools my entire life, son of a public educator, I heard Empower Mississippi Grant over there talking about capping open enrollment. My only question would be, how do you maintain levels and numbers and keeping them within a reasonable and manageable enrollment? I know it's possible, but what would the policy mandate if that were enacted in Mississippi? What would that look like?
Right, okay. So we're looking at several different bills right now, and there's kind of like, we're looking at model language from different places and coming together on something. Looks like right now we're sort of leaning a little bit towards kind of the Arkansas model, which implemented choice. But if you know that over a 3-year period, certain things came in first, then second, and third. And so we're not saying that a bill in Mississippi should look like we just get up tomorrow. I mean, I'd love that. I actually would, but I don't think it's necessarily the way that we're gonna go. So, yes.
So do you think that with the final product of open enrollment, you'll have schools will basically be seen as more equal on the educational level? You won't have diversity of how much better this school is than the other one if you can. So
you're talking about the the accountability
piece.
piece.
And you just take your tax dollars with you to send to that school. Do you think it would make them more equal after open enrollment was implemented?
Here's what I think. I think kids have unique needs.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that need may actually be that they need tutors. It might not be that they need to change schools, right? Their school's perfectly fine, but they're, listen, to this day, if you tell me I gotta go do algebra, I break out in hives. I become very afraid. It is not my place. Okay, it was terrifying. I was like, I need to have straight A's, and how am I going to do this with algebra? I bargained with my father to take chemistry instead of geometry at the school that I attended. And then I got in there, and they started writing equations, and I was like, oh no, wait. My dad's like, well, I was, I knew this would happen, right? So that's not my unique need, right? It's not where you would foster my education and where I need to grow with my comparative advantage as a student. So there are different types of schools that we believe entrepreneurs would open up, right? There's the revenue side of this and the supply side of this. And so kids might need different things than just to go to a different school. And so that's the piece that's really important that we have to not lose sight of as we're working through this legislation. But as far as you were talking about like the accountability, well, let me say this. I think we all agreed this morning that competition is a good thing. And if schools have to compete for students, even good schools, there is a sense that generally speaking, they become better schools.
And you were talking about how different schools have their certain strengths. Do you think it would make it, it's no for sure answer on this, but I think there could be a huge possibility that you'll have schools that specialize in just certain things, and there will be more specializations of schools than just general education.
I'll give you a great example of a school that was in Florida. I don't know if it's still there, because funding and, the economy, who knows, right? Because it was very donor driven. But it was called the Maritime Academy. The school was in Riviera Beach, Florida, which is the north end of Palm Beach County, but is predominantly an African American community. A lot of kids in the public school in this particular area, high crime area, were struggling and at risk. And if we don't educate at-risk kids, they become at-risk adults, right? Kids who go through the juvenile system, if we don't have things in place there, that kind of thing. So the notion became is you're going to be able to learn a trade, and it was in the maritime industry. So kids were taken out, they got to go out on boats, that was part of school, they got to learn how to tie the different knots, I used to go to a fundraiser for this school every year. I believed in it so much because it didn't take the traditional education and just put kids in a different school and say that's gonna fix the problem for their unique needs. It gave them something else that motivated them, and then in order to be able to do that something else and be part of that, you had to actually make good grades. You had to learn to read. You had to learn. Listen, I've been hiring part-time people, and I'm going to share this with you, and it's been heartbreaking. So I had a lot of people applying for jobs, and we were in a couple of counties, and they were like, yes, we want this job. We're paying anywhere from $15 to $20 an hour. It's a 15 start with an incentive, plus mileage. You can now work up to 40 hours a week. By that guideline, it's a 30,000 plus year job, right, for some people. So I had these people that are like, yes, not great interviews, but yes. When it came time, because we use a staffing agency for that piece, for them to fill out the paperwork, which amounts to about 8 or 9 documents, it just stymied. I just kept having all those people, and I thought, first I'm thinking, they just really didn't want to come to work, right? They just really don't want to work. I don't understand it. The problem was they couldn't fill out the paperwork. They weren't literate enough. And these are 24 and 25-year-old people. What do you think the future looks like for that? Do we want to keep that pipeline of, and I know we've made some great strides. I applaud the governor for his reading programs and that kind of thing. But we really have to transform education for all those reasons, because otherwise that 48% in Oregon can start to get to build. And so we have to empower people with a good quality education in that foundational piece. What they do from there, it doesn't mean they have to go to college, but if you don't have some of those basic skills, even the job of becoming the plumber or becoming, you say I want to do a trade versus go to college, is difficult to do. Yes?
An example, I was homeschooled my entire life. I never went to a public school. I might have went to a kindergarten class for a week. My entire life I was homeschooled, so my parents paid taxes for school education. So every year, $8,000-9,000. You could literally just sit in the middle of the floor and burn. And I was homeschooled because we lived in Florida for the first 5-6 years of my life, and Tri-County Academy at that time was an all-white school. and there was no blacks, and its floor was it was a railroad track.
Yeah, I've knocked a lot of doors in Florida, by the way.
If
Very
you-
familiar with your community.
If you, and I don't live there anymore, I live
Yeah.
in Madison now, but if you lived on one side of Flora, you went to Tri-County Academy. If you lived on the other side, you went to Canton Academy, or Canton High School.
Canton High School, yeah.
And so that was kind of something that I realized about, sophomore year of high school. It's like, I'm really just throwing money down the drain while having to spend more money to teach me my textbooks.
So, we think that homeschoolers, and we have homeschoolers who think ESAs are great, and we have homeschoolers who think they're not. And the fear has been of government intrusion on curriculum, right? Like there's gonna be some things like that. Making homeschool, taking that money optional is one way to address that. Douglas, there's some others that we've
Yeah,
been
and
chatting about.
Sarah Huckabee Saunders, as governor of Arkansas, has created the system so that you can get the money if you're homeschooling, but you don't have to.
You don't have to take it. So if your fear is.
And you have to spend it responsibly. You can't, buy it on a Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But it's got to be you can spend the money on homeschooling,
Yeah.
but it's got to be with approved suppliers, and I think that's the right way of doing
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there is an opportunity for homeschoolers to be able to utilize this. Without this transformation, you are in that scenario. You're going to pay those taxes and you will never see the benefit back to your own foundational education, correct? Yes?
I want to go back to a point you made regarding Medicaid expansion and talk about education for a second, because you talk about a big problem with Medicaid expansion was the fact that administration costs are not covered by the feds, and that is a significant portion of what is, required. So relating that to education, do you think that we can make that same argument for consolidating school districts? Some school districts that are seemingly unnecessary, that should be a part of another school district, and are really there, the only thing you really see are just fat cat, administration costs. It's like, I know there's no public school system in Issaquah County, but imagine paying the superintendent and 3 or 4 principals in Issaquah County that serves 1,400 residents, and how many of those are of school age. So could that same argument can be made for education?
I think that there will be people who will want to make that argument, but I think that that's something at the local level that, it's not going to be, something like this is not going to be administrated necessarily at the local level. Schools will be accepting that, but the opportunity of where that it gets administrated would be something at the state level. So let's say you go to a particular school, you apply for the ESA, and you say, I want to go to school here. You make the application, whoever's administering the program in a good way, then you're going to, that school, if Issaquah doesn't have a school district, there's nothing to apply for there.
Right.
It isn't going to force someone to create something. Now, what could happen in Issaquah is maybe some really great teachers get together and say, like, hey, I think there's an opportunity for a micro school here. There's a lot of parents, maybe it's not, there's only 1,400 people, right? Maybe there's only 50 school-age kids, but maybe there is an opportunity for people to say, like, hey, we'd love for our kids to stay closer to home. We'd not have to travel so far, for school or do whatever. Maybe we'd like a smaller classroom for some of the younger kids or whatever that is. There might be entrepreneurial things that could happen like that, and then that monies could be used for a scenario such as that. So, provided the bill language is written in such a way that those opportunities are included.
Good.
So, and I just think, look, from the standpoint of this, we talked, when she was talking earlier today about entrepreneurism, and she mentioned about being in love and passionate about the piece that you're talking about. I'm very passionate about education because in my own personal life, I had a younger brother who had issues. And I went to public school the first 2 years of my life, and then went to private school for the remainder of that time, because my brother needed to be in the private schools. There were issues there. He was kind of high functioning Asperger's and issues like that. And so our story was unique. But when I was about the age of 13, one of my friends who had been going with me to a private school switched to the public school system in Meridian. And one of the things she said to me is she was talking about how she didn't have to pay for her books, and she didn't. And I'm like, what? So I come home and I talked to my father that night, and my father is explaining to me the tax system, what he was paying, but he was still paying tuition for us to go. I could have gone to the public school, But there was a scenario where my brother, I was one of the few people that he had reasonable conversations with sometimes, or I could influence him. So my being on the school bus with him every day, sometime in a protective way when people were teasing him, other times it was when I was, just making sure he was doing his homework and being able to be like in the same school a couple years ahead. It just made sense for our family. That was our need. But my father had to pay the tuition. He had to buy our books. He had to buy our lunch. He had to pay for the bus every month. We paid, but he still paid those taxes. So I do understand kind of that scenario, and I thought to myself, well, that doesn't seem right. Like, why couldn't the tax dollars you're paying go towards our tuition? So I'm 13 years old. This is a very long time ago. There were no charter schools, no micro schools, there were a lot of private schools in Mississippi, but other than that, and so I sort of understood right away that like we had a unique scenario in our home, yet my father was paying, not that my father didn't think other kids should have an education and he minded paying into the system. That was not his attitude. But he wasn't getting that back to fit the unique needs of our education. So if that kind of makes sense, that's probably why I'm so passionate about it as well. But I say this about the entrepreneurial part. We use a trademark term that Charles Koch developed called principal entrepreneurship. He wrote a book called Good Profit. You talked about earlier about everybody, that profit is a good thing. But one of the things I want to say is that there's also, we talked about corporate welfare. We talked about what does good profit look like, right? What does principled entrepreneurship look like? So when we talk about being entrepreneurs, we talk about creating profit throughout society and throughout our country. Are we creating literally good profit, right? Where people benefit each other. There's that free exchange, that voluntary exchange that you talked about. And so I'll wrap it up, so if you have any questions, I know we're getting close to the end time and I'm sure everybody wants to get on the road instead of listening to me. Happy to come to your locations and you can listen to us further. We can just do round tables if you want, and I'll bring in policy wonky people that are much smarter than me. But at the end of the day, I just encourage you to read the books that you've been given, look into some of the things that we're talking about. Each of you got a card today and there's a QR code on there. Some of you may have already done this because I've spoken to groups at your college. But if you have an opportunity, we'd love if you would just take that survey and provide us your thoughts and opinions. We won't be necessarily emailing you a ton of stuff, but we might reach out to you about future events and things that you can
Starla,
engage.
thank you
Yeah.
so much. That
You're
was
welcome.
wonderful.